Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is a 3-part mini-series by the fantastic author over on Reddit. Of course, please do let us know what your thoughts down below. Please do like and share. And don't forget to hashtag Team Fear. As you all may know by now, I have a merchandise range over on Teespring with the links on screen on the information bar. So you can grab yourselves a lovely warm jumper or t-shirt and support the show and become an official Team Fear member. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's story, part 1 of the series entitled Killing Moon. Let's get straight into that. There's blood on my jammies! There's blood on my jammies again! In the 3 weeks I had worked as a nurse's aide at Druid Hills Arcadian Gardens retirement home, it was the first time I'd ever heard Horace Howell, occupant of a private room in the East Wing, speak at all. And now he was crying bloody murder. Or, more accurately, bloody jammies. Horace Howell was, as far as I'd ever heard or known, catatonic. I had been standing near the huge, utterly gorgeous fish tank in the Arcadian Gardens atrium, talking to another aide, Duchon, trying to find some common taste in music. It was a little past 3 in the morning. Third shifts are pretty dull most nights. You like Tyler the Creator? I asked. Tyler ass. You like Travis Scott? Dude sucks. I had just opened when I heard Hal's scream pierce the silence. I stared at Duchon, agog with the panic. Oh, fuck, he said. Not again. Again? Yeah. Now we've got to shower him and change his goddamn pyjamas. Even the notion of a 90-year-old patrician laying on his private room with blood-soaked pyjamas struck me as an emergency. Duchon strolled rather than rushed down through the main doors and down the hallway toward the Howell room. Happens about twice a month, he muttered. Most fucked up shit. We can't figure out where the fuck the blood even comes from. We'll go shower his scrawny old little white ass. Call the nurse down. She'll check him out and not see any visible wounds. The fuck? Yeah. Just a bunch of blood splattered all over the outside of his pyjamas. We don't know where it comes from. He's actually creepily well preserved. Healthy as a horse. Except for the fact he's basically catatonic. Except when he's yelling about blood on his jammies. Yeah. Blood! 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 Horace Howell continued to yell as Duchon and I made our way down the hall to his room. Blood! Horace Howell's private room was palatial, probably the grandest room in the luxurious Druid Hills Arcadian Garden. Druid Hills is a phenomenally wealthy community in northern New Jersey, and DHAG was where the first families of the hills sent their patriarchs and matriarchs to live in relative, assisted living luxury until they shuffled off their mortal coils and left their heirs appreciably wealthier. Even though Duchon seemed to be ambling down the hallway, he ambled at an ex-high school footballer's star pace, while I, half jogging at my normal pace and out of shape, Dungeons and Dragons Magic the Gathering player. And so, Duchon got to HH's room first and switched on the lights and whistled appreciatively. Motherfucker, he got blood on his Brooks Brothers jammies for sure this time. For my part, I felt slightly faint and leaned hard against the wall. The thing about working in a nursing home for rich folks is that you don't really see much blood. You see people piss themselves. You help them wash the shit off the buttholes, because it could be hard for old people to wipe, and a lot of the good old folks of Druid Hills probably were barely willing to wipe their own asses even in the glory days. You see a lot of bruises, and you help a lot of people up off the floor when they fall. You watch a lot of people mutter enthusiastically while Tucker Carlson does his nightly bullshit act on Fox News. But you don't see much blood. But in my entire life, I have never seen a human being as soaked with blood as Horace Howell was when Duchon switched on that light. Horace Howell owned several pairs of white Brooks Brothers pyjamas, emblazoned with candy cane red pinstripes and monogrammed HH on the left sleeve. Every day, per the dictates of Horace's son, Horace Howell III, the aides take off the pair of pyjamas Horace was wearing the night before and put him in a fresh pair. I had never seen so much as a speck of filth on Horace's PJs until my eyes adjusted to the light in his room and saw the copious splatters of bright red blood all over the chest and arms of the PJs. Moreover, Horace's face was so maculated with bright red blood that it looked like he was dressed up for Halloween as Poe's mask of Red Death. Horace made eye contact with me, and for the first time, it felt like I could see something behind his eyes. It felt like he was looking at me, rather than just blearily scanning his surroundings in a catatonic daze. He cleared his throat. "Blood," he said helpfully, and I got it all over myself again. Deshawn sighed. He was a big guy, about 6'2", 220 pounds and mostly muscle, and also smart as fuck. He was poised to graduate from nursing school and start making serious cash. He was also, as he often pointed out, eager to go to a job where he felt like he could make a difference in people's lives, rather than just watching rich people waste away and die. "You know," he told me, as he gently but powerfully scooped up the diminutive, blood-soaked Mr. Howe. Howell was a short, neat man, whose chart listed his weight as 154 pounds. "The one and only thing that bothers me about leaving this job is that I have a strong feeling I am never ever going to figure out the mystery of how this motherfucker does this to himself." I'll spare you the details of showering Hal in his private bathroom, with the marble floor and the gold toilet that would make our president orange with envy. Ever seen that episode of The Simpsons where Smithers gives Mr. Burns a sponge bath? Well, it's a lot like that. The blood-soaked Brooks Brothers' pyjamas were crumpled up on the bathroom floor, and as we gently rinsed and toweled Howell dry, we'd call a nurse down, of course, but just as Deshawn had predicted, the man had no wounds anywhere on his bony, porcelain white body. I remembered another question I had always meant to ask somebody. "Hey, I have a question about this dude's pyjamas." It felt a little weird talking about how like he wasn't even in a room, except that by now he was more or less wasn't in the room again. He was back to being stonily silent and seemingly completely unaware of his surroundings. Deshawn held him up with one arm and he helped me pat his groin dry. He sighed. "Yeah? Well, why do all his pyjamas have that huge hole in the back, a little above his arsehole? Does that make it easier to help him poop, or—" Deshawn laughed a fine, deep bass laugh. "It's because Hal here believes he has a towel, so he had all of his pyjamas custom altered, even when he was a big important businessman who supposedly had all of his marbles." "You're shitting me, right?" "On my mama," said Deshawn. "On my mama. This old motherfucker, for as long as anybody can remember, has believed he had a towel. Had his PJs altered. Had his suit pants altered. I mean, even setting aside the whole blood thing, this is one mysterious motherfucker whose dick you're currently toweling dry." "Oh, fuck off," I muttered, laughing. "Anyway, there has to be a way to get to the bottom of what's going on here." "Shit," said Deshawn. "Not without putting a camera in this dude's room or something equally unethical that somebody who is really wanting to get a real grown-up job as a nurse would never, ever want to officially be part of." Killing Moon, Part 2. Let's get straight into that. I copped a medium quality Nannycam spy camera with a well-reviewed cell phone app included on eBay for about $50. As a general rule, I'm not the kind of person who goes around planting spy cams in old people's bedrooms. But when I learned that one of the oldest and richest dudes in Druid Hills periodically wakes up drenched in blood that is not his own, my curiosity got the better of me. Horace's family keeps a teddy bear on his nightstand. The bear, a gift from Horace's grandson, Horace V, surprisingly enough, is a large teddy bear with a placid, patrician face decked out in tartan vest, navy bow tie, khaki slacks and a monocle. The spy cam fit inconspicuously into the folds of the bow tie when I went into Hal's room at 4:15 on a Thursday morning, ostensibly to check on him, but really to plant the camera. After I set up the camera, I paused for a moment to gaze around the room in a bout of macabre fascination. In addition to being the most palatial private suite at the Druid Hills Arcadian Gardens, it was also far and away the creepiest, decorated with antiques and sinister-looking baubles Horace had brought with him from his estates when he moved into the retirement centre. A huge boar's head hung on the east wall of the room. Deshawn told me, and swore on his mama, that the old man had personally killed the boar back when he was still a vigorous young man. "Whole family is fucking obsessed with the outdoors," Deshawn had said. Back when the old man first got here and he was still lucid sometimes, he told me how he had killed the fucking thing on a hunting trip in Virginia. That thing looked scary as fuck, I had muttered. The goddamn tusks, Deshawn agreed. Plus, it's the eyes. It's like the eyes got so much hate in them that it feels like they're looking through you. Imagine what that big beast looked like when he was still alive. The boar's head was the centrepiece of the room's decor, but there were also little carved stone idol gods and demons I was told Horace had picked up when he made his business trips to Sri Lanka as a young man. There was a huge, gaudily colourful statue of a bloody-mouthed Kali trampling all over the back of her consort, Shiva. The west wall of the room was dominated by a huge print of Goya's painting of Saturn devouring his son, which I always assumed was a kind of sneak diss on the old man's part of his own son. The fancy teddy bear was the only normal piece of decor in the room. Thank God the old bastard remained in a catatonic slumber the entire time I looked around the room. If he had chosen any of those few moments I was in the room alone planting the camera to start convulsing and crying out, I'd have no doubt I'd have been so scared I'd have straight up pissed myself. I made my rounds, checking on the patients, and then returned to the break room to hang out with Deshawn a little more, who was by far and away my favourite co-worker. He was shooting the shit with his kind of buff dude named Tony, who I didn't particularly get along with. Tony was ex-military and had a tattoo of a dragon on his left bicep, and spent most of his time sketching about how unfair it was he was making $14 an hour as a CNA while doctors drove around in Porsches and never had to wipe anyone's ass. I guess the antipathy I feel for Tony is pretty mutual. He thinks I'm a self-righteous little socialist creep and, I mean, guilty as charged. And so as soon as I entered the break room, he grunted and said to Deshawn, "Well, I better get back to my job," and stormed off. "You sure are good at making friends," said Deshawn. "I'm not sure I've ever seen Tony dislike another white guy the way he dislikes you." "I'm a charmer. Hey, listen, I know officially you don't want to know this, but la 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 la," giggled Deshawn. "Can't hear you. Can't hear a word you're saying." "Okay, but, well, in that case, note to self, just set up a nanny cam in HH's room. Hit it well. Maybe now we can get to the bottom of what happens when he gets blood on his jammies. James Bond shit. Plus, there's a motion detector on my camera that will notify the app on my phone when there is movement. So, sooner or later, we will be able to catch him in the process of whatever it is that he's doing. Yeah, unless that app of your cheap-ass spy cam is arse. It has excellent reviews," I said defensively. The app on my cheap spy cam was arse, although I got numerous false alarms every time someone went into Hal's room to check on him. The next time the bizarre old man got blood on his jammies, I did not receive a single motion notification until I heard Hal's piercing patrician shrieks. "Blood on my jammies! Blood on my jammies! Can't get this blood off!" I was in Elizabeth Barrett's room, helping an aide named Rosita turn Elizabeth over from a right to a left side while she slept. Liz was very limited in motion, so we make sure to manually turn her frequently to keep her from getting disgusting bed sores on her body from laying in one spot for too long. Rosita rolled her eyes. "It's time of the month again," she chuckled. "You okay finishing up here?" "I'll go take care of our old buddy, HH. Better you than me, darling." Luckily, even though the app somehow failed to notify me in a moment about movement in the room, the camera did begin record, and I was able to access the footage. The footage was grainy and poorly lit, but the details I could discern made my mind boggle. By the time HH moves abruptly and vigorously enough to trigger the camera, it's clear that something has already been going on outside his window for some time, because the first image is of Hal suddenly sitting up bolt upright with jarring rapidity, but as the eye of the camera opens, it's also possible to hear a low, ominous chanting noise, barely coherent, outside. Then, as HH sits bolt upright in bed and slowly swivels his head around the room, rapidly at first, but then more purposefully, you could hear murmurs outside the window. The chant started up again, and the only phrase Deshawn and I were pretty sure we could agree on, making out, was "To Megatherion." Over and over, whatever that meant. Watching the footage out on the retirement centre's gazebo at almost 5 in the morning on my Lenovo pad, Deshawn and I both unconsciously held our breaths as the old man began, and at first agonisingly slowly, to put weight on his left foot and try to push his body to a standing position. We were holding our breaths because we knew perfectly well, given how toneless and atrophied and useless his legs were, he should have simply crumpled onto the floor like an empty popcorn container, casually tossed to the floor after a bad zombie flick remake. His left foot accepted the weight. Chanting and ambient noises outside the window grew louder, spookier. Although the camera was mostly directed at HH, we could make out in the periphery that someone was fumbling with a window, that it was being opened. When HH put weight on his right foot and forced his body to stand up, full length, he raised his arms above his head in a great, shockingly powerful stretching motion. Though we could not see clearly enough, he was the same porcelain white, emaciated grotesquerie that we had bathed so many mornings. He was now moving with an avidity of grace and power. HH started to swivel his head around once more, but this time something strange happened. Instead of swivelling slowly and gingerly, his head snapped back and forth at a literal breakneck speed, and at first it looked like his neck was breaking itself on each turn to the right, fixing itself at the centre, and breaking again as it ratcheted left. Then the movements became so crazed, it looked more like it was a rubber man being played with by invisible tweaking hands. Then he let out a sort of quiet, guttural moan, and his head stopped moving, and something was wrong with the camera, because his face had begun to look scaly in parts and blurry, incoherently pixelated to be exact in others. That was when HH calmly and gracefully began to walk on his two-toneless and atrophied legs toward the window and out of frame. One last thing we did see, although the bear was not positioned right to tell exactly how he crawled out the window. The chanting by now had also become so loud and crazed and frantic, I'm astonished that no one heard it, was that something curious fell out of HH's pants as he made his way to the window. At first I thought it was the largest, most disgusting turd I'd ever seen in my life. Then Deshawn and I, watching together in a dark gazebo in silence, realised it was a stubby, fat tail. A stubby, fat, greenish-grey reptilian tail fell out of the spot where the crazy old man insisted a hole be added to all of his Brooks Brothers PJs to accommodate his tail. Deshawn and I both sat and stared at the footage. The ever-loving fuck. We got to figure out where this dude goes and what he does, I said softly, all drenched in a cold sweat and breathless with fear. Killing Moon, Part 3, Final. Let's get straight into that. Things can escalate pretty quickly. I guess once you get your hands on a medium quality spy camera. It was shortly after Deshawn and I watched the perplexing and deeply disturbing footage of a seemingly catatonic old rich dude climbing out of his bed, crawling out of his window, and growing a towel once in a lunar cycle, that I decided the best way to get to the bottom of things was to attach the spy cam to Horace Howe himself. When I explained my plan to Deshawn, as I stood around and watched him mop up some food, and an old woman named, I swear to God, Daisy Fairchild, had puked up in the dining room. He was pretty unenthusiastic. Are you fucking nuts, big bro? You can't go around fucking planting spy cams on plutocrats. I don't want any part of this bullshit. I'm out of here in a few months, and as soon as I get my nursing degree, and I don't need any bullshit like this keeping me from getting licensed. What if I promise to keep you out of it completely, and that I'll take full blame if anything goes sideways? He laughed loudly. Oh, then it's a great idea, big bro. You're my fucking hero. My plan was pretty simple, really. Since I work the third shift 5 or 6 nights a week, depending on whether I'm picking up overtime, I am responsible for both dressing and undressing Mr. Horace Howe. Every night, once we got him into his non-bloodstained jammies, I would simply discreetly pin the spy cam to the lapel of his monogrammed candy cane Brooks Brothers PJs. Every morning, before any visitors came in and noticed, I subtly removed the camera, and nobody would be any wiser. The plan was not foolproof, but I was curious enough to take a few risks at a dead-end job wiping the butts of the rich retirees of Druid Hills. Ideally, no one would ever find out, except for Deshawn and I, who would now have footage or whatever the fuck it was that Hal was doing on his nights when he woke from his seemingly permanent and hopeless catatonia, yelling that he had blood on his jammies again. Several weeks later, on the 19th night, I had affixed the cam on Hal's lapel as I dressed him for the night. I was nervous enough to keep track. Deshawn and I were shooting the shit again in the break room when we heard Hal's piercing patrician drawl yelling, "Blood on my jammies! Blood on my jammies!" After we showered Hal and changed him into crisp, clean PJs and got him back into bed, Deshawn and I went out to the gazebo one last time, both of us too nervous to speak, to watch the footage. The footage was hard to wrap my mind around, probably in part because I've never been very good at visualising first-person camera angles. I was born just a little too early to have grown up on the kind of found footage horror movies that acclimate a person to seeing action shots from a point of view of a camera. The first thing that happened was the camera and the room reeling, as we saw from Hal's point of view what it looked like as he sat bolt upright in the bed. Suddenly, physically prolific and ready for a long hike after another prolonged bout of catatonia, we heard the same eerie "To Megatherion! To Megatherion!" chant going on outside the window. The room spun as Hal repeatedly shook his head with ever-increasing vigour until it was suddenly shaking so fast his neck should have broken and the camera on his chest shook like a Starbucks cup in a broken cup holder on a bad stretch of road. Hal stood up and the camera showed a view of the window. We could see several men in plague doctor masks milling around outside and chanting. They had opened the window and were beckoning Hal to come toward them. The rapidity and rapacious of Hal's movements at this point weren't really captured well the first time. Now that we could see from his own point of view, we could see just how eerily quickly he sprinted from his bed to the window and then climbed out to the window, staggering at first and then walking and growing vim and vigour across the Arcadian Gardens property, across the very gazebo we were sitting on watching the footage as it happened, and then out into the woods behind the retirement home. In the woods, there was a crowd of people wearing grotesque masks, standing around and chanting. I saw a porcine man in a pig mask, a huge titted naked woman wearing a black werewolf mask and dancing obscenely, a quidcunks of men in gaudy peacock masks, and a huge naked man wearing a bull's mask and wielding a huge butcher knife. The masked people were dancing and writhing around a tree that I could see a naked man tied to. The man looked terrified and was squirming frantically but uselessly against a tight coil of golden rope. The bound man's hands were tied above his head, like in a painting of Saint Sebastian. His feet were also bound together, and his entire body was lashed to the tree with thick, glittering rope. At this point, I saw something roll over the camera that turned my stomach when I realised it was drool. Horace Hal was salivating, drooling at the image of the bound man in front of him. The woman in a werewolf mask danced lasciviously toward the camera lens and then got down on her hands and knees, and I could only see the tops of her buttocks, but the way the camera suddenly jerked, I presumed she was playing with Horace Hal's cock. The man in the bull mask suddenly shouted, "To Megatherion! The great beast has arrived!" An ecstatic murmur followed from the masked crowd, and the camera moved to show that a surging crowd of masked and hooded figures were now moving out of the woods. The man in a bull mask, the Minotaur as I had come to think of him, suddenly plunged the butcher knife into the chest of the man bound to the tree. From the point of view of the camera, I could see the blade gleaming in a strident moonlight, pierce the thoracic cavity, and I could now hear the crackling and crunching sound of tissue and bone and cartilage being carelessly dismissed by cold metal. A sick, lascivious sucking sound came in unison from the onlookers. The camera looked around the semicircle of increasingly frantic masked men and women. More drool flowed down the patrician chin of Horace Hal and across the lens of the camera. I had to choke back the urge to puke when the Minotaur stuck his whole fist into the hole in the chest he had just ripped open and twisted it back and forth, grasping and feeling around in the cavity until he yanked out the man on the tree still beating hard. "Feed, beast!" the Minotaur yelled. "Feed! And ensure our prosperity for another lunar cycle!" Now the camera moved forward too enthusiastically, too sensually. I had too much good of an image of the throbbing, beating, bleeding heart as it moved past the lapel camera, spilling bright red blood all over Hal's jammies. Thanks to the camera angle, I was mercifully occluded the visual image of him actually eating the heart. But the audio captured all the sucking, all the slurping, and all of the satisfied smacking that followed. Then, the crowd continued to chant as the camera turned around. Hal began to scamper back over the path to the Druid Hills Arcadian Gardens retirement home. I looked over at Deshawn, who had broken out into a cold sweat. Jesus fucking Christ. What the fuck? He said eloquently. I was sweating too. Deshawn is lucky. He is now board certified and is working in one of the top hospitals in the state as an ER nurse. I'm still taking care of Horace Hal. I still don't know exactly what he is, except that he seems to be some kind of beast who is worshipped by a cult of creepy millionaires. Once a month, he still wakes up from his semi-permanent catatonia, yelling about blood on his jammies, again and again and again. Wow, hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I. Please, of course, do let me know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share, and don't forget the hashtag Team Fear. Big thank you to the author, Goldvine_throwaway. Fantastic story there, a little bit different from my channel, and I enjoyed it very much. Hope you're all having a great start to the week, and looking forward to an even better, relaxing weekend. And as you know, above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.